Hi, welcome to Talkin' Sunday Readings. My name is Ann Carter. I am here again with Pastor Richard Stadler, with Father Chuck Carter, and behind the camera, behind the scenes, is Tim Carter. We are here today to discuss the readings for the 20th Sunday after Pentecost. There are many Lutheran churches who on this Sunday will be celebrating Reformation Day. So we are going to incorporate a couple of readings and hopefully discuss quite a bit today. The readings that are on the agenda are the Old Testament reading from the book of Joel, chapter 2, verses 23 to 32. Then we are in the New Testament, 2 Timothy, chapter 4, verses 6 through 8 and 16 through 18. Then we jump to Revelation, chapter 14, verses 6 and 7. And the Gospel, we are still in Luke. We're discussing Luke 18, verses 9 through 14.
A reading from Joel. O children of Zion, be glad and rejoice in the Lord your God. For he has given the early rain for your vindication. He has poured down for you abundant rain, the early and the later rain as before. The threshing floors shall be full of grain, the vats shall overflow with wine and oil. I will repay you for the years that the swarming locust has eaten, the hopper, the destroyer, and the cutter, my great army, which I sent against you. You shall eat in plenty and be satisfied, and praise the name of the Lord your God, who has dealt wondrously with you. And my people shall never again be put to shame. You shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I, the Lord, am your God, and there is no other. And my people shall never again be put to shame. Then afterward I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. Even on the male and female slaves in those days I will pour out my Spirit. I will show portents in the heavens and on the earth, blood and fire and columns of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon to blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved. For in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there shall be those who escape, as the Lord has said, and among the survivors shall be those whom the Lord calls.
So, Joel, an Old Testament prophet, one of the minor prophets. Not that he wasn't as good as any of the other ones, but he writes his book, again, towards the end of the Old Testament, and he is talking about the new days that are to come. This new time when Yahweh will be with his people and things are going to happen. Mm-hmm. And they're recognizable things. I noticed that twice in the litany of all of these things that are going to happen, there's going to be prosperity, almost unparalleled. The threshing floor shall be full of grain, the vat shall overflow with wine and oil. I will pour my Spirit on all flesh, sons and daughters will prophesy, old men shall dream dreams. Even the male and female slaves I will pour out my Spirit. I'm going to be one in the midst of all of you. And twice he says, and my people shall never again be put to shame. Mm-hmm. I thought that was very interesting, that shame is the word that was used to describe them in their captivity. Shame because they had not followed Yahweh. Shame that they had been overtaken. But that's going to be all in the past now. You're going to be one with me, and we are going to be together, and it's almost unimaginable, the joy that will be experienced.
And remembering that promise of restoration, he can then exhort them to be glad, rejoice. Here's all the things that God is doing for you. He has given the early rain. He has poured down a rain. And those two reminders set you up to recognize the divine passive in verse 24, where he says, the threshing floor shall be full. And there's this thing you can look for, not only in the Gospels, but also in the Hebrew Bible, where something is put in the passive voice and the subject who is responsible for it is God, but he's not mentioned. It's just a different thing. And here, obviously, it's God who's going to be filling these threshing floors, and so it's just, but the end of that is quoted by Peter as being fulfilled on Pentecost.
Yes.
And so this became a very special text for Christians to claim as fulfilled on Pentecost, where the Holy Spirit is poured out, and both men and women are speaking forth the truth of God. They're prophesying, and so forth. So it's just a really pregnant text for the Christian church. Yeah. And how does it fit Reformation?
Well, for those of people who don't know what Reformation is, it is a new day as far as the church is concerned. There were those who believed that the Catholic Church, predominant in the 16th century, was not on the right track, that things had to be moved back. There were some very courageous men who
And women too.
yes, who made a stand, and who, some of them were not successful. Savonarola, for one of them, was burned at the stake in Florence. But others, there was this gradual coming to knowledge that what has been taught is not right, and we need to get back to what and the Spirit needs to pour out on us again, O Lord, and help us to say the truth.
They discovered the gospel and started preaching it dramatically, that we are saved by grace through faith, not because of anything we're doing. And so this became an evidence that the Holy Spirit had been poured out on the church and gave them this clarification, and so.
Yeah. Yep. The Lutheran Church, of course, their great reformer was Martin Luther, hence the name. I often had in my Sunday school classes said, "Who is Martin Luther?" And they said, "Well, isn't he that black preacher?" No, that's Martin Luther King Jr. Martin Luther is somebody different, old guy, German, who stood in the face of great oppression and the opposition, that's the word. And yet as he said, "Here I stand, I can do no other, God help me."
And this section ends with a wonderful word of promise, where it says, "Everyone who calls on the name of the Lord shall be saved." And so it's an invitation to just simply trust what God has revealed. Yeah.
So moving to Revelation then.
A reading from 2 Timothy. I am already being poured out as a libation, and the time of my departure has come. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith. From now on there is reserved for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will give me on that day. And not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing. At my first defense no one came to my support, but all deserted me. May it not be counted against them. But the Lord stood by me and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and save me for his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen.
There's this angel flying with an eternal gospel to proclaim. And I think that's, again, what Reformation is all about, what the church is supposed to be all about. To every nation and tribe and language and people, fear God, give him glory.
What's interesting is where this is positioned in Revelation 14. First, you've had a symbolic discussion of the first beast, a second beast, and the opposition the church is going to face on earth from governmental authorities and from misguided religious authorities and so forth. And then they picture this 144,000, which we'll get to in another reading next week.
Yeah.
But right after that comes this special angel. And what is it that makes the 144,000 believers? it's the gospel that this angel is now broadcasting. And so it's a great symbol for all the preachers of the church. And it is interesting that in Lutheran commentaries, Martin Luther is pictured as this fulfillment of this angel, but he's one of many that God has used during the history of the Christian church.
Yeah. Well, if Jesus is the Word, as John says, the Word made flesh,
Right.
then anytime you preach the Word, Christ is in the world.
Exactly.
And that's what the church is supposed to do.
Right.
That's its main
Right.
job, requirement, its obligation. Any other comments, or we'll move to 2 Timothy?
A reading from Revelation. Then I saw another angel flying in mid-air, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water."
We've been in 2 Timothy for a few weeks now, for a few Sundays, and Paul has been advising Timothy on how to be a good pastor, on what to do to continue preaching. And now here he's coming to the end, and he's coming to the. This is so poignant. I have fought the good fight. I finished the race. I've kept the faith, and the time for my departure has come. There's reserved for me the crown of righteousness that God is going to give to Paul. It isn't what things that Paul has done. It's this great gift from God. And the Lord, verse 18, the Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and save me for his heavenly kingdom. It is to God be all the glory, because he's the one who is going to do it. I keep coming back to the word poignant, but it's his final confession. It feels like.
Well, and if you remember the temple service, during the Feast of Sukkot, there was the final liturgical event, was the pouring out of the waters.
Yes.
And he's now comparing himself to, I'm already being poured out as a drink offering. He's he knows he's at the end. And so there's a spirit of resignation here. Time of my departure has come. And we pointed that out with one of the other readings some weeks ago, that to fight the good fight literally is to agonize the good agony. And boy, his life was full of agonizing over his own sins and receiving the gospel, but also agonizing over opposition and so on. So this is just really a poignant passage, as you said.
Yeah. And I think it was last week we talked about Jacob wrestling with God. It seems that that's what Paul did as well. He wrestled with God about things in the world, coming to the right attitude, the right action about how to approach things and people, but always with God, wrestling with God for the sake of the world. And isn't that what we're supposed to do? We can't just turn a blind eye to it. We've got to get involved in it. We've got to work it through with the Father.
And he has a wonderful view of death in verse 18. The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. And it's a reminder that sometimes death is a rescue. It is the ultimate cure for a person who's been just terribly battling cancer or some other things, that God gives them the ultimate cure by letting them pass from this life into a life where they'll have a perfect body and no bad health, but also a perfect life in heaven without persecution and without all the things that go in a fallen world. So he reminds people that there's a different way of looking at suffering in this life, and especially death, that a lot of people don't have. So
I'm reminded of the scene in Lord of the Rings where Gandalf and Pippin are facing death, and Gandalf says it's white shores, and Pip says, well, that's not so bad, is it? No, it's not bad at all.
well, and you think of Polycarp, when he was being burned at the stake, he said, for 86 years I have worshipped the Lord. He's never done wrong for me. So how can I disown him?
No.
And so that's the spirit that Paul is talking about here. Yeah.
The Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and regarded others with contempt. 2 men went up to the temple to pray, one a Pharisee, the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, was praying thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other people, thieves, rogues, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give 1/10 of all my income. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even look up to heaven, but was beating his breast and saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his home justified rather than the other. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, but all who humble themselves will be exalted.
So moving into then our gospel for the day, which is a parable again. And also this one, as the last, I think it was last week we had one where we got the explanation right away. This one, Jesus told a parable about those to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous.
That really fits Reformation, because how do you become righteous? Is it through works of the law, or is it through faith in Jesus Christ and what He's done for you? So this really fits the Reformation theme.
Yeah. Now this is a very well-known parable, and everybody, I think, has thought it's about prayer, how you're supposed to pray. But it's more about your attitude, about your relationship with God.
How you get righteousness. How do you
Because-
become righteous in the sight of God?
Because the Pharisee thought he had it all. And he stood apart from everybody because he wasn't going to get too close.
Well, that word that's... go ahead.
The Pharisee did have it all. I mean, he did. He had the education, he had the knowledge, he had the influence. But how did he use that? He regarded, and he goes right up to the temple. He thanks God that he's not like other people. He takes everything that he has, and he shores it up for himself. He has no ounce of humility, and that's what separates him. And he wants to remain in that state.
Well, and
He wants to remain there.
And some of the translators, the ESV says, the Pharisee was standing by himself, prayed thus. The King James translates it, he was standing and praying to himself. And the Greek text allows for both, depending on how you take the syntax of the sentence. And I like the and I wonder if Jesus didn't put that in there just to be really ironic. The guy wasn't praying to God.
At all.
He was praying to himself. He was his own God. And he's bragging. He's not praying. And he's not ever asking for forgiveness. And so...
He's announcing to all of those, the rabble there around him, how it is that you do get to all the things.
Well, and a lot of prayer was done out loud, and so people could hear his laundry list of good things that he's done, and certainly not like that Pharisee like that tax collector over there. And the tax collectors won't even look up to heaven. You can almost hear him muttering this quietly, God have mercy on me. And he doesn't say in the Greek text, a sinner, it says the sinner. And some translations miss that.
This one misses it, yeah.
Mine does too, and I think that that's a wonderful statement of humility. I am, like Paul says, chief of sinners.
Yeah. Ken Bailey, again, in his analysis of this, he talks about, and I don't know Greek, so you will forgive me. He says that the word that the tax collector uses is hilaskomai, which means atonement, make atonement for me, rather than have mercy on me.
Right.
And Bailey also believes that they were in temple during the daily sacrifice for atonement. So when he is praying this, when the priest has gone back into the sanctuary and is lighting the incense, and as the prayers are going to heaven, the tax collector asks God, particularly, if you can, make atonement for me too, because I don't think it's possible, because but have mercy, make atonement for me.
That certainly would fit the person who is telling this parable, because he is the atonement.
He is the atonement.
He's the
yes.
atoning sacrifice. And so he may have tucked that into this parable just to let people know that when you go to God for atonement, not for approval of your good works. You know? And so that is a very legitimate possibility. Yeah, very much so.
We're good. Well, happy Reformation Day for those of you Lutherans out there who celebrate the day, wear red, and enjoy yourselves. We look forward to seeing you next week on Talkin' Sunday Readings. Share us, like us, and have a great week.